After 5 years of delicate restoration works, Buckingham Palace is preparing to open the doors to its east wing for the first time, and we have had the first look inside. It's here the King and members of the royal family stepped out onto the most famous balcony in the world.
Buckingham Palace dazzles the world with its golden halls, historic treasures, and flawless image of royal perfection. But behind the grandeur lies a story few ever hear: the struggles of the maids who kept it all running. They endured impossible rules, meagre pay, and lives lived under constant scrutiny, all while remaining invisible to the outside world. Their departures weren't just resignations, they were quiet rebellions against a system that prized image over people. So what truly drove them away? Stay with us as we uncover the truth. Behind the Golden Gates. Buckingham Palace is a name that instantly brings to mind images of splendor, tradition, and power. Tourists from across the globe flock to catch even a glimpse of its gleaming facade. They marvel at the towering gates, the polished guards in red tunics, and the sheer size of a residence that has stood as a symbol of monarchy for centuries. To the public, it represents a fairy tale: golden chandeliers, endless corridors, and the charm of royal history unfolding in every room. But for those who worked behind the Golden Gates, the story looked very different. Beneath the chandeliers and marble floors lay an environment ruled by discipline, hierarchy, and unspoken rules. It was a place where staff were expected to move silently, blend into the background, and yet perform their tasks with flawless execution. Every sweep of a broom, every polished banister, every folded cloth carried the weight of tradition. And behind the glamour, these small actions were the difference between approval and reprimand. Former palace staff have revealed that what appeared to outsiders as a dream job often became a relentless grind. The beauty of the palace was maintained only through extraordinary effort, long hours, and constant vigilance. Errors were rarely forgiven, and expectations left little space for personal comfort. The grand halls that dazzled visitors became daily reminders to staff that perfection was not optional, it was demanded. To many of the maids, Buckingham Palace was more than a workplace. It was a stage, one where their every move was observed, scrutinized, and judged. Unlike the tourists who snapped photos and left, the staff lived this reality day after day. And for some, the cost of maintaining this royal facade eventually outweighed the pride of serving inside Britain's most iconic residence. The palace may have been the jewel of the monarchy, but within its walls, whispers of discontent grew louder over time. Behind the grandeur and order was a question that even the palace couldn't silence. What was really driving loyal staff to walk away from such a prestigious role? But if the palace's dazzling beauty came at such a high cost for those who worked inside, what invisible weight were the maids really carrying? Stay tuned. The answer may surprise you. The unimaginable pressure faced by maids. When visitors step into Buckingham Palace, they marvel at the glittering chandeliers, the ornate furniture, and the polished floors that seem to shine endlessly. But behind the scenes, the people responsible for maintaining this perfection live a reality few outsiders would envy. For the maids, every day was an exercise in discipline, precision, and silent endurance. Former staff member Anne Simmons, who spent over a decade working within the palace's 775 rooms, described an environment where nothing was ever left to chance. Cleaning wasn't simply about removing dust or polishing surfaces. It was a performance, almost ceremonial in its ritual. Every mop stroke, every folded cloth, every polishing motion had to meet a standard rooted not only in efficiency, but in centuries of royal tradition. The smallest mistake could ripple far beyond the maid responsible. A streak left on a window, an unevenly folded towel, or a scuff mark missed on a stairway could bring swift reprimands. In a place where grandeur defines the public image, even minor oversights were treated as significant failings. For the maids, attention to detail wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. The work required a balance of speed and perfection. Solutions had to be mixed to exact measurements. clothes folded to precise shapes, and mops wrung to the right tension. There was no room for shortcuts. Everything carried meaning, from the choice of tools to the rhythm of movements. Cleaning here was not a job. It was a tradition in motion, one that preserved the palace's image as the crown jewel of Britain. On top of the physical strain, there was the constant pressure of being watched. Maids were rarely alone. Senior staff inspected work closely. Visitors roamed the corridors, and members of the royal family could appear unexpectedly. At any moment, good work might be noticed, but so too could errors. Living under constant observation meant that composure and silence became second nature. Simmons revealed that discipline eventually became a way of life. To succeed, staff had to anticipate needs before they were spoken, work quickly without rushing, and remain invisible yet indispensable. It was a balancing act that left little room for rest, yet ensured that the palace's legacy remained untarnished. Buckingham Palace's beauty wasn't an accident. It was built on the shoulders of maids who carried pressure that few outsiders could ever imagine. But if this much stress surrounded even the simplest tasks, what other hidden rules shaped their daily lives? Keep watching, because the next revelation may leave you stunned. The strict cleaning rules. If the pressure of working at Buckingham Palace wasn't enough, the rules governing how cleaning should be done added another layer of intensity. Every task, from dusting an antique vase to scrubbing a sink, was surrounded by strict protocols that left no room for improvisation. To the outside world, wiping down a table might seem simple, but inside the palace, even that could be a test of discipline. Anne Simmons, who served more than 10 years as a maid, described how everyday products that you'd find under the kitchen sink in most homes were strictly off-limits within the palace walls. Something as ordinary as disposable wet wipes was banned outright. Despite being marketed as flushable, they posed recurring problems for the palace's old and intricate plumbing system. Repairs were costly, and the inconvenience of blockages could not be tolerated. But there was another reason behind the ban: sustainability. King Charles, long known for his environmental concerns, supported the prohibition. Instead, staff were required to use reusable cloths, which were not only softer on the palace's delicate surfaces, but also aligned with the monarchy's commitment to conservation. Even tools had to pass a test of tradition and practicality. Steel wool, for example, was strictly forbidden. The risk of scratching marble, granite, or stainless steel was considered too high. Instead, maids used microfiber cloths and gentle natural solutions, such as lemon juice, vinegar, and warm water, carefully mixed to the right strength. These homemade blends ensured surfaces gleamed without leaving harmful residue behind. The rules may have sounded excessive to outsiders, but within the palace, they were seen as necessary guardians of history. Every item in use, whether a mop, a cloth, or a bottle of solution, was chosen with the same care that went into preserving priceless paintings and antique furniture. Cleaning wasn't just maintenance, it was conservation. Yet these strict standards placed immense strain on the staff. Each action had to be executed perfectly. A cloth folded the wrong way, a solution mixed too strongly, or a scratch left behind on polished wood could have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate task. Mistakes weren't just personal failings. They risked undermining the palace's reputation for flawless grandeur. Anne often described her role as walking a tightrope. Balance was everything. Speed versus precision, discretion versus visibility, efficiency versus care. A single misstep could ripple through the household, noticed not only by supervisors, but sometimes even by the royals themselves. For the maids, there was no such thing as a minor detail. Over time, these rigid practices transformed cleaning into something much greater. It became an art form, one where loyalty, patience, and discipline were displayed in every sweep and polish. But this pursuit of perfection also created unbearable stress. Many maids began to question if the honor of serving inside Buckingham Palace was worth the sacrifices it demanded. And if the rules for cleaning were this unyielding, What was life like for those who had to live and work inside the palace every single day? Keep watching. Life inside Buckingham Palace. For the public, Buckingham Palace often seems like the ultimate dream workplace. With its glittering chandeliers, sweeping staircases, and rooms drenched in history, many imagine that working there must feel like stepping into a fairy tale. To wear the uniform, walk the corridors, and serve in the presence of royalty sounds like an honor reserved for the chosen few. Yet for those who lived and worked behind its towering gates, the day-to-day experience was far less magical. Anne Simmons, a former maid who dedicated more than a decade of her life to the palace, described it not as a home or even an office, but as a kind of living museum. Every hallway, every dining room, every artifact carried centuries of history, and with it, the enormous responsibility of preservation. Tasks that might seem routine elsewhere were elevated to near ritual inside the palace. Dusting a table wasn't simply about making it shine, it was about protecting delicate surfaces that might be hundreds of years old. A wrongly chosen cloth, or too much pressure on a polish could mean permanent damage. In this world, even a minor error could ripple through the household, raising questions not only about the individual staff member, but also about the palace's reputation as a symbol of perfection. Life inside Buckingham Palace meant living with constant awareness. Staff knew that they were not only serving the royal family, but also safeguarding the monarchy's image. Every corridor had to gleam, every mirror had to sparkle, and every flower arrangement had to be precise. Maids moved quietly, often unseen, yet the impact of their work was on display at every moment. The palace's grandeur, admired by millions of tourists and dignitaries, depended on their vigilance. Discipline was woven into the fabric of everyday life. There was little room for improvisation or shortcuts. Cleaning agents had to be carefully measured, cloths folded a particular way, movements practiced until they became second nature. Simmons recalled how even the choice of natural cleaning solutions, lemon, vinegar, and warm water, was rooted not just in practicality, but in tradition. These methods were safer for fragile materials, but they also reinforced the idea that nothing inside the palace was ordinary. Working in such an environment brought a strange blend of pride and pressure. On one hand, the staff were immersed in a world most people could only imagine. They handled priceless artifacts, worked in historic rooms, and sometimes caught glimpses of the royals themselves. For many, the sense of privilege was undeniable. But the flip side of this privilege was suffocating control. Every step had rules. Every action was monitored. Even when unseen, staff were aware that mistakes could be noticed at any time by supervisors, by guests, or even by a passing royal. The result was a culture of constant vigilance. A hallway swept too quickly, a chair polished unevenly, or a single object out of place could undo hours of effort. To outsiders, these might seem like small oversights. Inside the palace, they were treated as breaches of duty. For the staff, the line between success and failure was razor thin. This duality, honor mixed with relentless expectation, defined daily life within Buckingham Palace. Employees carried the rare privilege of serving in one of the world's most iconic residences, yet bore the unseen burden of upholding traditions that left no room for human error. Beneath the grandeur that captivated visitors was a disciplined system where precision, hierarchy, and respect for protocol ruled every moment. For Anne Simmons and her colleagues, this was the hidden reality of palace life, a constant balancing act between pride and pressure, where beauty and elegance were sustained by an invisible web of rules that demanded nothing short of perfection. The Queen's Kitchen. Behind the velvet curtains and grand corridors of Buckingham Palace lies a place that rarely appears in photographs, yet sustains the royal household every single day: the Queen's Kitchen. Far from an ordinary culinary space, it was a world defined by discipline, restraint, and a standard of precision that few chefs anywhere in the world would ever encounter. Darren McGrady, who once served as Queen Elizabeth II's personal chef, recalled that preparing food here was never just about flavor. Each dish was a statement, an act of loyalty to the monarchy, and a demonstration of respect for centuries of tradition. Mistakes weren't merely frowned upon. They risked unsettling the balance of an institution built on ritual and image. The choice of ingredients alone revealed how the kitchen mirrored the palace's broader atmosphere of control. Produce was often sourced from royal estates like Balmoral, bringing to the table not just food but a sense of connection to the land the monarch ruled over. Salmon from Scottish rivers, venison from the estate, freshly picked berries, and vegetables grown in carefully maintained royal gardens all carried symbolic weight. These weren't just ingredients, they were heritage. Each had to be prepared in a way that highlighted its natural beauty and emphasized the Queen's long-standing appreciation for Britain's agricultural gifts. Yet just as some items were prized, others were outright forbidden. Garlic, for instance, never crossed the palace threshold. In most kitchens around the world, it is a staple ingredient, but within Buckingham Palace, its pungent aroma was deemed unsuitable for royal dining. For chefs, this meant exercising constant self-restraint, setting aside creativity to follow rules that often went against their culinary instincts. Flavor experiments, bold spices, or personal flourishes had to take a back seat to tradition and protocol. Presentation was equally non-negotiable. Every plate had to be arranged with mathematical precision, a garnish slightly misaligned, a sauce unevenly spread, or an overcooked element could easily be seen as disrespectful, not just careless. In this kitchen, taste alone wasn't enough. The dish had to look impeccable, carry symbolic weight, and meet the exacting standards of royal dining. For McGrady and his fellow staff, this environment demanded constant vigilance. Every action, from chopping vegetables to plating desserts, was performed under watchful eyes. Errors didn't just risk disappointing a diner, they carried implications for the palace's reputation. To falter was to fail not only the Queen, but the monarchy itself. Working in the kitchen was both a privilege and a burden. Few chefs could claim to have cooked for royalty, yet the suffocating level of control meant that personal ambition was constantly suppressed. Service, tradition, and flawless execution came first, leaving little space for individuality. In many ways, the Queen's kitchen was a microcosm of Buckingham Palace itself, outwardly glamorous, inwardly relentless. The pressure was constant, the rules unwavering, and the expectations absolute. For some, the honor was worth the sacrifice. For others, it became a reason to walk away. But if the kitchen was this unforgiving, did the rewards truly match the burden? Stay tuned. The truth about their pay might be the most shocking revelation yet. The shocking Buckingham Palace's hidden pay. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace suggests wealth beyond measure: marble staircases, gilded ceilings, priceless art. For those who admire it from outside, working within such walls should mean prestige and privilege. But for many maids and housekeepers, the reality was far more sobering. The pay simply didn't match the palace's image. The truth became impossible to ignore when a live-in housekeeper job posting made headlines. The advertised annual salary was £19,900. At first glance, it might seem reasonable, especially with meals and accommodation included. But the details revealed something troubling. The hourly rate worked out at just £7.97, less than the legal minimum for workers over 22. Deduction rules allowed the palace to count lodging against wages, a technicality that kept pay low while maintaining the veneer of legality. The announcement sparked outrage. Critics called the figure insulting, especially when measured against the immense wealth of the monarchy. Unions condemned it as a glaring example of undervaluation, loyalty to the crown, packaged as privilege, while real financial recognition lagged behind. The palace defended itself, saying the posting was an error and that the full compensation package, including pension contributions, was competitive for live-in roles in London. But this explanation fell flat for many. After all, what good is free housing if you're still underpaid for the sheer level of discipline, secrecy, and expertise demanded? The comparison with other royal households around the world made the picture even starker. In Denmark, staff at Amalienborg Palace reportedly earn wages closer to national averages without heavy deductions for accommodation. In the Netherlands, household staff enjoy contracts aligned with union standards, offering both financial security and protection. Even in Monaco, where living costs soar, workers serving the princely household are compensated at levels considered fairer for their workload. Against this backdrop, Buckingham Palace, perhaps the most famous royal residence in the world, appeared to lag. For those working inside, the frustration wasn't just about money. It was the imbalance between expectation and reward. Maids were expected to live within strict rules, constantly on call, and responsible for maintaining irreplaceable heritage. They gave up personal freedom, lived under surveillance, and adhered to traditions that allowed no mistakes. Yet the financial return hardly reflected the sacrifices required. Some endured, driven by the honor of serving the monarchy. Others quietly walked away, deciding that prestige couldn't pay bills or ease exhaustion. In the end, the palace's polished halls concealed a jarring contradiction. A workplace that demanded loyalty as if it were priceless, while offering pay that often felt anything but. And if pay was this low, what other sacrifices were demanded? Stay tuned, because at Buckingham Palace, loyalty costs far more than money. The invisible sacrifices. For Anne and colleagues who worked inside Buckingham Palace, the cost of the job wasn't measured only in pounds and pence. It was measured in time, privacy, and the erosion of personal freedom. Life as a maid meant more than long hours. It meant existing in a world where work and life merged into one, leaving little space for individuality. Living on site inside the palace sounded like a privilege to outsiders, but for staff, it often felt like a gilded cage. Being provided with accommodation came with strings attached. You were never truly off-duty. A knock at the door late at night could summon a maid to attend to an unexpected task. A sudden change in royal plans could upend personal schedules without warning. Days blurred into nights, and the rhythm of life was dictated not by personal choice, but by the demands of the royal household. Privacy was another sacrifice. Maids lived in staff quarters where discretion was paramount and personal conversations could easily be overheard. Every action, even outside working hours, risked being scrutinized by colleagues or supervisors. There was little room for self-expression. The uniform, the behavior, even the tone of voice were shaped by palace expectations. For many, this wasn't just employment, it was servitude masked by the grandeur of tradition. Rest was scarce. The sheer volume of work, cleaning endless rooms, preparing for state events, responding to constant shifts in royal schedules, left little time for recovery. Staff were expected to carry themselves with composure, no matter the exhaustion. Mistakes made under fatigue weren't forgiven. They were documented. The pressure to appear tireless was as much a rule as the cleaning protocols themselves. And then there was family life. For live-in staff, time with loved ones was limited. Days off were precious but rare, and often overshadowed by the looming possibility of being called back for urgent duties. Birthdays, anniversaries, and personal milestones were sometimes missed, sacrificed at the altar of royal duty. These invisible costs rarely made headlines, but they defined the experience of those who served behind the palace's golden gates. The world saw glamour, but the staff lived a reality closer to confinement. One where duty overshadowed freedom, and loyalty came at a personal price. But were these sacrifices endured willingly, or were they quietly resented until they pushed people to walk away? Keep watching. Whispers of discontent. In the shadows of its golden halls, Buckingham Palace concealed a truth few outsiders could imagine. The world saw loyalty and order, but behind the grandeur, frustrations were building quietly. The silence of the staff wasn't a sign of contentment, it was survival. Whispers spread in staff quarters, carried between weary colleagues, or shown in the growing number of quiet resignations that no longer could be ignored. former employees began to share their experiences, exposing the hidden burdens. Some described the exhaustion of endless shifts, others the suffocating scrutiny that left them feeling stripped of identity. For many, the palace wasn't just demanding, it was consuming. It wasn't simply a job, one former maid confessed. It was giving up who you were. That sentiment echoed in hushed conversations. Service required not only labor, but pieces of personal freedom surrendered day after day. Rumors of discontent grew steadily. Stories circulated of supervisors punishing the smallest slip-ups or colleagues breaking down under the strain of constant pressure. The palace demanded invisibility from its staff, yet the demands themselves made that invisibility impossible. The stress etched itself into their posture, their faces, their lives. For some, leaving became the only act of self-preservation. Resignations, at first scattered, began forming a pattern too clear to ignore. Each one carried its own reason. Some left over low pay, others because of lost family time, and many simply because the atmosphere had become unbearable. The palace, from the outside, appeared timeless and unshaken, but within its walls, the revolving door of staff told a different story. Walking away, one former worker admitted, was the first time I felt free in years. These departures whispered of more than discontent. They hinted at a deeper imbalance, a growing realization that prestige could no longer compensate for exhaustion. What had once been considered an honor had for many become a burden too heavy to carry. And so, what began as private murmurs of dissatisfaction gradually evolved into something more visible, a quiet exodus that threatened to expose the cost of royal perfection. But what did these departures truly signal for the monarchy itself? Stay tuned to find out. The real reason they left. To the world, Buckingham Palace stands as the ultimate symbol of tradition, prestige, and grandeur. Tourists line its gates, snapping photos of guards in red uniforms, imagining the glamour of royal life. But for those who lived and worked behind those golden gates, the picture was far less enchanting. The maids who kept the palace shining weren't driven away by a single grievance. They left because of a web of pressures that, woven together, became unbearable. The rules alone could break even the most disciplined worker. Every movement had to align with centuries of tradition, from how a mop was wrung to how a cloth was folded. Mistakes weren't small. They were magnified in an environment where perfection was the baseline. Add to this the suffocating sense of being constantly observed by supervisors, visitors, and even members of the royal family, and the palace quickly became more prison than privilege. Then came the question of pay. For all the prestige of working at the world's most famous residence, wages remained shockingly low. Staff who gave up personal freedom, lived under constant scrutiny, and shouldered immense responsibility, often earned less than their counterparts in other royal households across Europe. For many, it felt less like a reward and more like exploitation masked by grandeur. But perhaps the greatest sacrifice was personal. Living on site meant always being on call. Privacy was scarce. Family time was limited, and individuality was slowly stripped away by endless rules and expectations. For some, the palace became a place where identity faded into uniformity, where they no longer felt like people, but parts of a machine designed to uphold the monarchy's image. What tied all of these threads together was the lack of recognition. The world admired the sparkling chandeliers, the immaculate carpets, the flawless staterooms, but rarely thought of the invisible hands that made it possible. The maids were the guardians of royal perfection, yet their work was taken for granted. Over time, the glamour that had once lured them in lost its shine, replaced by fatigue, frustration, and the realization that loyalty came at too high a cost. So, what do you think? Were these maids simply walking away from tough jobs, or exposing deeper cracks in royal tradition? We'd love to hear your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.